Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here at your conference. I hope you guys are having a great conference so far. What I like to start with, we actually have our second meeting of the Advisory Council for the Statewide Plan for Higher Education. I think I told you this last time that the way that we're approaching the Statewide Plan for Higher Education this time around compared to the previous iterations of this is much more expansive, and so the advisory committee is much larger this time, and it includes members from K-12, it includes obviously members from the four sectors of higher education, it includes the teachers unions, it includes healthcare association, the business council. We want to get the perspective across the board for a lot of those five major themes, which I'm not going to read off the five major themes. I know you guys, many of you have even finished your plans, so I don't want to reiterate, but as many of you know, it covers, starting in the beginning, it covers, according to our higher ed parlance, the whole P20 spectrum, right? And the partnerships, important partnerships that go across the K-12 districts. It then gets into a lot of the access and opportunity angles and how you're addressing access and opportunity, which is really endemic to a lot of the for-profit sector, and then we get into making sure that you are really paying attention to a lot of the trends for how we need to prepare students for the workforce and society and to be, both national and global citizens. And then last is we talk about the transformations going on at colleges. And I will say, when we first started thinking about this, a lot of the transformations were around a lot of the different technologies and sustainable energy, and then even getting into a lot of the things that happened during COVID, where colleges needed to transform overnight. So we started to think about, wow, how did colleges adapt and change, God bless, and get ready for kind of the post-pandemic era of, you never know, on a dime you may have to turn. You never know if it has to do with something like a pandemic, or a war could break out, and it could change international students coming here. Or indeed, as I always say to people, for everything that's happening now with the federal administration, we thought we were going through a bit of a seismic change during COVID, but in 2025 it said, hold my drink, COVID. We've got almost these, what I call kind of weekly, guesses as to what's going to change next. And then of course, beginning with all these sweeping executive orders and dear colleague letters, and of course what's happening now with the reconciliation bill, where it's really looking like it's going to be just an incredible, if it all goes through, an incredible transformation of higher education when it comes to student financing, student loans, taxes on endowments that could start to now threaten and eat into traditional financial aid packages. And you guys, what's good about how you guys are always kind of guessing, when it comes to a new administration, the for-profit sector is always trying to figure out how things turn on a dime and shift in completely a different direction sometimes, depending if it's a Republican or a Democrat. We're seeing this now, the plans, if they go through, again, some really transformative ways of looking at what you're going to have to collect data on, and how you're going to measure gains in income, and then they're going to make colleges put into a shared fund in case things start to happen for students who don't get jobs they thought they were going to get. Again, luckily, you guys have already been, right? You've been in the middle of this for many years, and I think some of the other sectors are just trying to figure out, wow, what does all this mean at this point? So, I just want to, what I want to do is at least tie into, and we're going to deal with this tomorrow with the Advisory Council, there are some really major transformational initiatives going on right now at higher ed. And they're going to, you don't need to worry about so much do I need to build these into my, how I've addressed the five major areas, five focus areas that we put out in our statewide higher ed statewide plan document. But, and I mentioned this the last time I was here, a lot of these things overlap. So the one major one that we're doing is called the Graduation Measures Initiative, and the Blue Ribbon Commission was put together a number of years ago to say, how are we going to reimagine what we consider a high school graduate, and whether they truly do have the academic and other skills necessary to be ready to go into college or to go into the workforce or otherwise. And there were 4 major transformations, and actually, incredibly enough, I didn't know that they were on this schedule. For the July Regents meeting, which is typically just honestly more of a one-day, they do like a retreat, and it's usually a one-day, and they come to us and they say, if you've got like consent agenda items, put them on there. But I will say the big one that looks like it's going to be on for July is the first transformation in the graduation measures initiative to reimagine what it takes, what it should look like for when somebody graduates high school, and they're envisioning something very different. And so the first, what they're going to do is they're laying out the first transformation, which is the portrait of a graduate. And the portrait of a graduate, as I mentioned last time, it shows a much more holistic way of looking at a student when it comes to being like a global citizen, communication skills, content, what areas of content do you feel they need to be competent in? And it's going to recognize students in a much broader way as opposed to just what we feel is the more traditional, take this amount of Regents exams. We're going to count your credits, like the Carnegie credits right now, like by seat time. They're going to look at things a little bit differently, and they're going to portray what does this portrait of a graduate look like. That's a lot more of a modern way of looking at what a student needs to come out of high school with, as opposed to just checking the boxes for 3 credits in algebra, 3 credits in global history. And then the second transformation, this isn't going to happen at this Regents meeting. Like I said, they're just dealing with that portrait at this point to see if the Regents do indeed agree with how they've envisioned the students graduating. The next one after that is that they're going to be like redefining like how indeed people do accumulate credits, and what is now going to be a bit different related to like performance-based assessments and performance-based learning. And then we're going to sunset. Right now, we're one of the few states, as many of you know, that have our test requirements, our Regents exam requirements, and otherwise that you have to again check the box. And it doesn't really fit for a lot of students. Let's say you're going down like a CTE pathway, right? And they're telling you you're a senior, and you're like, well, I still haven't passed the advanced algebra exam, and they're like, well, I'm in a CTE curriculum. But you're still making them, pass an exam that may not even match. By the time they're a senior, they know which pathway they want to go down. And we want to be able to accommodate all different types of students who may be into like, CTE programs. Maybe they're into like agricultural programs. Maybe they're into healthcare programs. Maybe they're into more traditional pathways where they do want to take all the Regents exams, and they do want to take all the AP exams. And we're not getting rid of them, but we are making sure that we are not going to, penalize somebody who's not checked all those boxes of the traditional way. And then the last transformation is going to one singular diploma as opposed to like local diplomas and Regents. We're going to allow for like the diploma to have designations associated with them if somebody is advanced in certain areas, but it is going to be much more of a unified way of saying that you have a diploma and you're recognized just like anybody else who may have taken, a CTE pathway or otherwise. So that's that. And then the other thing that's connected again to like P20 initiatives, you may have seen that we're trying to now have a much more comprehensive approach to early college, high school dual enrollment. In the latest state budget, they actually set aside an additional like almost $10 million worth of funding. And we're going to now we're one of the few states that are left that does not have like a real definitive policy on dual enrollment in early college, high school, and making sure that like parents and schools and partnerships between colleges, they kind of know what is it that we're expecting of like dual enrollment early college programs, because they're all over the map right now, right? When it comes to transferability, when it comes to like funding models, and even though we were kind of at the vanguard in New York State, I will say we were ironically, we were kind of at the vanguard of early college, high school, and opportunity programs because we had our P-Tech program and our Smart Scholars program. They're very much cohort models. where they're very prescriptive, and you've got to really say, look, I'm ready to jump into this cohort model with all the supports underneath it. And we all know that that's just the kind of the tip of the iceberg. For the most part, you've got a lot of students who just enroll in a few courses at like a community college, and they may be paying out of pocket, or they may be getting a discounted rate, or their school district may have negotiated something. We want to at least take our shot at saying, let's make this a little bit more of a unified, kind of comprehensive, understandable approach. And so they do have like money in that, and more to come on that. You're going to see more details on what exactly does that look like, but it's basically going to be like school districts are going to be able to access money now if they come up with the right model to give us assurances that they are indeed paying attention to transferability of credits, that they are prioritizing, if you do have like economically disadvantaged students who we want to improve access and opportunity as outlined in one of our priorities of the statewide plan for higher ed. We want to see that these elements are there if indeed, partnerships, school districts want to jump into the, this way of doing dual enrollment, early college, high school. And then the last thing I'll say, and this is our third guest speaker tomorrow for the when I get the advisory council together. Partly getting the advisory council together and getting our speakers to talk on these initiatives I just mentioned here that tie into major transformations that are going to overlap. Partly it's because I don't want to sit there and have them listen to me all day, right? And so you get people that are really kind of subject matter experts in other areas, and we can all kind of bounce ideas off each other. The last is for our Office of Professions, which, again, as many of you know, sometimes you're overlapping with just our traditional higher ed office, and then other times we're with our Office of Professions because we work with them on the licensed professions, but we want to make this all integrated. And so the last speaker that we have is going to be sharing like what are the latest with our 55 plus licensed professions, and how are the connections overlapping, again, according to our priorities, how are they overlapping with like K-12 schools going into higher education entities, and what do we really need to think about for students to make sure that they are indeed ready for the transformations that are happening in our licensed professions, right? Whether that's engineering, whether it's healthcare, whether it's the mental health professions like social work, the design professions like architecture, interior design, right? All these things we happen to be, and I think I've said this before at our meeting, we do indeed have many issues sometimes where we're behind the curve in New York, but I will say the one area that I've noticed that we truly, if we can tap into this, we've got no other state is like us where we have an umbrella entity that can bring together under the same roof and under the same auspices of the Regents and the Board and Department of Education, all of the licensed professions, all of cultural education, all of K-12, and all of higher ed, right? So when it's working in its most effective way and pulling together, right, our institutions of higher education like yourselves to say, like, you may have a foot in the licensed profession for what you're doing, you may have a foot in higher ed related to what you're doing, and we want to make sure that we're able to pull that all together and get it reflected so that students and families really aren't constantly just trying to figure out the fragmentary ways of approaching a lot of these plans for how they want their students to kind of come up through the K-12 system, be ready by the time they're in 12th grade, and be ready to make that transition, whether it's straight into the workforce or going into an institution of higher education. So that's what we're hoping, and that's really, like I mentioned at the outset, we're hoping that our statewide plan under these kind of 5 priority areas, which I think almost anything you can mention, whether it's AI or sustainable education or dual enrollment or access and opportunity programs, we can see that somewhere slipping into one of the 5 areas, and sometimes they fall into more than one area. And anytime we can get your insights on that and look forward to building it into reflecting that in our statewide plan, so that anybody who kind of goes onto our website and they click into that statewide plan, it's not just some one-dimensional document that sits on a shelf. It's truly something that they can click into and they can start to go down and explore different links, you know, and see like where all this work's being done, whether it's at our schools or whether there's partnerships or, you know, grant-funded programs that we put together with New York State, with the governor's office. We want this all to be reflected appropriately in there, along with the facts and figures, right? The meat and potatoes will be in there too, like what's going on with enrollment, what are the most popular programs, what seems to be slipping away on us, and you know, we want that all reflected in there too, you know, and a lot of, you know, nice, easy to understand kind of trend lines and charts, and hopefully it's helpful to, you know, not just our families, but also everybody, you know, who's in the room today. So, I'll pause there. And turn it over to Janet so she can kind of help us navigate.
Does anyone have any questions for Bill? I mean, a lot of what Bill just summarized are some of the themes that I'm going to cover too, but before I start, I wanted to make sure if anyone had questions on the items that Bill talked about, especially Portrait of a Graduate, because it's a little bit different than the statewide plan that we've spent so much time talking about. Yes?
Just for personal reasons, with the Regents diploma and the various options for high school diplomas, I missed the part where you mentioned when that's scheduled to be in effect, or is that something work in progress?
Yeah, I think at the upcoming Regents meeting, if you're not able to watch it, they're going to do a presentation and it's going to update the timelines for when it's going to happen over the next 5 years, and they're going to start sunsetting. They're going to show you like in what exact year they start to sunset the Regents exam requirements. And I think, I may have this wrong, and again, this is why I don't want to kind of speak out of turn before they do their presentation, because they may have tweaked the timeline a little bit. But I think those literally coming in now into high school are actually going to be able to realize the fact that they don't need to take Regents exams by the time they graduate. Yep.
Those that are in high school or going into high school?
Those that are going into high school, yeah. And you're right, I don't know what it means for like where they are. That's something I'd have to like look at the updates and see where, you know, where that starts to take effect. But I think it starts to take effect pretty quickly when they start to sunset the examination requirements. I think that starts to take effect. I think they're envisioning that it starts to take effect very quickly.
We cover the Regents meeting every single month, and so if you're not currently getting the Hinmans, I'm pointing at Heather in the back, we do a recap, and so we'll make sure that information gets out to everyone if you're not able to actually monitor it. And it's something we'll probably start adding to our regular meetings to make sure that everyone's updated as that work of a Portrait of a Graduate actually starts to come into place, because in the past we've talked about it from your side of admissions, curriculum. Is it more opportunities? Does it allow for internships, more partnerships with P through 20? How do you support those systems? So it does fit within the themes that we're going to talk about, but I think it's important, and it's great that they're going to roll that out at the July meeting, and we'll make sure that we get that information out to all of you.
Yeah, and the caveat is, you know, all these things have to still be voted on by the Regents. So I don't want to, you know, I don't want to, you know, make any assumptions here that any of this is passed and is happening right now until they have to vote on a lot of that. But at least at the very least, they are putting out a pretty descriptive plan with timelines as to when they're expecting to see the Portrait of a Graduate, which could literally happen this summer, and then the next step related to like redefining credits, and then the next being sunsetting diploma assessment requirements, and then last being to have that unified high school diploma.
So switching over a little bit to, you know, I think I mentioned at the membership meeting earlier, you know, thank you to all of you who've already submitted your statewide plans, and I was sharing with Bill before we came in. There are definitely some trends, Bill, that we're seeing, and would love some input from all of you since you wrote your plans. But I think one of the area common themes is, you know, the enrollment cliff and enrollment declines, but also the concern regarding potential additional college closures in the sector. So we've talked about this sector, right, has had a lot of closures and is much smaller than we were at the last statewide plan. I was shocked that there was like 50 campuses and like 35 institutions. We're down to now, I think 14 across the state and, a very different footprint. So I don't know if you want to talk just briefly on that for a moment. I know there was some conversations at the Regents meeting in the highly qualified institution, which almost everyone had in their plan as well as both a concern but also a potential positive. But what does that do to the landscape and competition?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, we've been getting over the past, it's nothing new. For the past 5 to 10 years, we've been getting inquiries from both in-state partnership scenarios and then some out-of-state partnership scenarios, and now even obviously out-of-country partnership scenarios. So we've tried our best to look at our regulations and see, as you mentioned, because we were getting a lot of requests from like out-of-state, we actually created a regulation for highly qualified out-of-state. And then that came to fruition at the last meeting where Northeastern University is looking to merge with Marymount Manhattan College. And then we've had to really beef up our guidance, and we're going to try to get this reflected too in our plan. And you bring up a good point in that kind of the practical parts of the statewide plan for higher ed. I'm kind of talking kind of the high level stuff, but I will say that some of the practical stuff that can be explored through the statewide plan for higher ed can be, do we have regulations or policy or guidance or initiatives that we need to think about? So for example, as many of you know, we have very prescriptive regulations when it comes to if you want to establish like a branch campus or an extension center, an extension site. You have requirements for like master plan amendment where we have to do canvas. And then we have our regulations related to like mergers, and if there are indeed some things that are barriers to allowing for mergers or things that we need to do to say we're in a different era here for those that are considering partnerships between entities. And then you may have seen there's actually been mergers now. There was the I think it was the announcement. I'm hoping I'm not getting ahead of myself.
I'll stop you if you say
with
something.
Russell Sage and Albany College of Pharmacy. Like these are happening a lot now. People are coming to us and saying, what do we need to do? And right away we have to just get together with all the stakeholders in our Office of Counsel to make sure that we have everything in place to do that. And the most important of that is our staff in the Office of College and University Evaluation and our Office of Professions, if it happens to fall there. Sometimes we have to work together. And we've gotten very good at, like with the College of St. Rose closure, like for example, we got really good at turning around real quickly with the partner schools to say, we got a bunch of students that are in the middle of something here that they're going to need to be able to have, very quickly, set up like clinical internship agreements. And sometimes colleges, you will say, we don't have that footprint of a program. We don't even have a master's level program in education. And we'll say, well, we could work with you if you want to, assume the program, and we'll see if we can get it registered more quickly than maybe we've done in the past. So, things like that, like if things come to mind where they say, look, you got some regulations that are completely out of date here. We understand that we need to balance out the whole quality assurance mechanism and consumer protection mechanism with the other side of it, which is, we know we're in an era here where 220 some odd institutions of higher education in New York State, most likely, obviously, that's just going to continue to, unfortunately, consolidate and decrease, and God knows it could accelerate even further depending on, what happens with the, with the USDE and, what they're thinking about for changes to the, to Higher Education Act and all that,
Another, theme, and you touched on it, that is really important, I think, for everyone in this room is the potential for the new opportunities under dual enrollment, early college, high school. I think, as you know, there has been a historical issue with, not allowing the for-profits to be able to fully participate in P-TECH. And obviously, smart scholars, there are some, but there have been a lot of high schools, right, who want to partner with our institutions because of the ability to get that credit. And actually, as we've heard from some, students are actually getting the credit, they're enrolled in the program, and then they're going in with the credits getting out earlier and getting the job on the other side, especially with those employment partners. So we hope that as you guys continue to think through that, but that was a theme in almost everybody's plans about how do we ensure that students are getting quality college credits, right, that are transferable, that allow them to enter into higher ed and into their degree or program ready to start, and not just say, I got 3 credits in English, and it's really not the same rigor that it would be for college credit, was another theme that I saw in many of the plans.
Yeah, I think what that comes down to, I will say, you'd have to trace kind of the history of higher education, and many of you are students of that, and you know it a lot better than others, that, it's this balance of, the reason why I contend that the United States is just light years ahead of any other country when it comes to our higher education and our kind of, dominance. If you literally look at the top 100 rankings for for the international rankings, United States dominates them, which is ironic for kind of the sentiments that are being directed at higher ed right now, and being, a lot of the issues going on with scapegoating higher ed for certain things, or for it being too elite and it needs to be knocked down a peg, and they're just antithetical to how higher ed has driven the innovation and has driven us to a point where the United States is just the leading economy in the world and the leading higher ed system in the world. But I will say we're always balancing out, to circle back to yours, we're always balancing out the fact that we as a state government or the federal government, we want to be careful to say we are going to have our quality assurance mechanisms. We are going to make you, look at our standards, and do you meet the quality assurance standards with faculty, curricula. Sometimes they get even very prescriptive if you've got like a teacher preparation program and they're asking you, do you have these pedagogical courses, or do you have these programs? But we also want to be careful to say that we don't dictate to like a Columbia University or otherwise that like, you need to take these 3 credits, right? And they might say to us, when they come into an engineering program, if they don't have X, Y, Z, or if you're asking us, you're dictating to us to take these 3 credits that are not fitting into our curriculum, right? Then you start to move completely away from what the whole notion of a faculty governance system is, and an independence, and a way that you are able to follow your own mission and objectives that you set out, whether it's a board of trustees or an ownership structure. That's your domain. That, in many cases we have to be very careful, how we get into that. On the other side of it, though, is there's a ton of unprecedented now. There's a lot of public dollars at stake here, right? Whether it's our opportunity funds, whether it's TAP, whether it's Pell Grants, whether it's student loans. So that's the other hook to it, is we do have a role in saying that, we want to make sure that, if we set up a structure here of dual enrollment and we're going to give money to partnerships, that we do have a certain baseline expectation for making progress on stubborn issues like you're not going to take credits for this, and a student ends up building up 12 credit hours, right, at a community college or a partnership, and then they might be able to transfer them and they might not be able to transfer them, right? So it's balancing that whole thing out of saying, we do not intend on just turning the whole higher ed system on its head and telling Columbia and telling SUNY school, either you're going to take these credits, or you're going to be considered, out of compliance with how you need to operate as a school. But on the other side, we can put in, as we can put in incentives and language for incentivizing colleges and groups to get together and put their heads together and say, in the name of access and opportunity and otherwise, we really would appreciate if we start to, make progress on these issues, of importance like that. Yeah.
One of the things that we have asked in our template that we shared with institutions, we added on to some of the things that you had. And one was, can you list, the programs and new degrees since the last statewide plan, and then followed by, okay, what are the degrees and things you're looking for in the future, so that when you look at it from each individual institution, since it has been so long, we thought it would help to see the growth of
Gotcha.
kind of where they were and then where we're going. As a sector, I think it became very apparent to me reviewing plans that healthcare and the allied health professions has been significant growth since the last statewide plan, but also in relation to the employer partners. And so we also asked each of the institutions if they have advisory councils or employers that help with curriculum development or thinking through the future and what they need from a workforce, how do we build that in? And I think there was some great trends that you can actually see where they're talking about, and I'm looking at Mike Hatton right now, about AI and automotive and what does that look like and how do we need to think about it, or technology development. AI was definitely something that almost everybody had somewhere in their plan, and then also the need for elevation of degrees. And so I think it's great when you look at, an institution that may have been predominantly an associate degree institution with a couple of bachelor's degrees may now have its first master's, and looking forward is really how do you build out the master's or maybe get to the university definition over the next 8 years, because that's what their employer partners and their advisory councils are indicating to the institution. So we asked everyone to add those pieces into their plan, thinking that I think the sector is going to be a little bit different in that way compared to SUNY, CUNY, and the nonprofits, because they are so driven by industry and employers.
Yeah, and we're hoping that we're going to be able to get our arms around all that. Like sometimes, like I will say, we're digging into this now, where we're pulling together, like as many of you know, we have our information resources office, and we have our what we call the RISAC committee, which is again dealing with the research information and bringing together the cohorts in each sector to see what data we have and don't have. And as you mentioned, we're kind of eager to see how does this look. Is it 18% of students that traditionally have gone into like a business or finance or economic, and has that shifted now to where it's like 21% have now shifted to STEM and healthcare? And then we want to try to track that and see exactly what are the things and how much are they shifting the way we're expecting them to shift. So appreciate that and look forward to seeing the results for your sector, and comparing it, how that might be a lot different perhaps for like a CUNY or a SUNY. But I think we're going to see a lot of trends actually that go, in some cases they actually are going to look pretty similar, just the way things are moving with like STEM professions. And like you said, AI and advanced technology, and just the cost of the cost of higher education is driving people. Obviously, as many nobody needs to to be told that like it's driving people to like majors that they're going to be able to start using right away, right? Whether it's engineering, technology, healthcare, get a license, get me to work so I can start paying off my loans.
So not only is he, the Deputy Commissioner of Higher Ed, his daughter graduates from high school this week and will be going to Syracuse. So also a father who has a student who will be becoming a freshman, and she's going into engineering, right? Yeah.
She's going into biology for now. She doesn't know what she wants to do. My son was engineering.
Engineering, sorry. But so he has personal experience in living that as well. I want to open it up for a few minutes to see if people have, want to build off those themes that, I talked about, especially if you're thinking about new curriculum and trends of programming, or whether the current program approval process, we asked the question on master plan amendment and program approval, and within this group, most of them actually were applauding it and thought that it made sense, sometimes that it slows things down. But this is an opportunity for all of you to share some of your input with Bill as well. Does anyone want to build off of that a little bit? You are not a quiet group usually. Mike, do you want to go? I feel like you want to say something.
Yeah, I have an issue with the definition of a highly qualified out-of-state institution.
Yep.
I know you articulated certain criteria that you're thinking about, how you're going to go about determining those kinds of things.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you could, at this point in time, I'm not prepared to say what my thoughts would be on a highly qualified institution. Are there mechanisms and maybe forums or opportunities for institutions to greater expand on what they would like to see in a qualified institution to come into the state of New York. I think we've had a couple of examples lately, LIM, there are others out there where highly qualified institutions and entities have come in and made their case. It looks like it's a positive case, and it may work in a unique circumstance. I'm not afraid of competition, but I'm afraid of the possibilities of folks coming into the state of New York and diluting what we already have as high quality.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah, understood. And I think we tried to take, so what the issue was is that we've got colleges that are on the brink, and a lot of times you'd be surprised that like other colleges have no interest in trying to merge with them. It's not an easy thing. We've had many discussions. I have to say we've had countless discussions where it actually came to like the 11th hour. They're about to like merge. They finally got their boards of trustees to get themselves together and say, you know what, we got a program. We had one out in the western part of the state, obviously, that again fell apart at the 11th hour. And so when we finally hear about universities in other states that are willing to kind of come in and say, I think I can save this, the main thing that we try to say is, if you're going to do it, we do not expect you to come in overnight and bring in your footprint of what you do in the other state. We want you to preserve. If you think you're going to merge with that school, you're going to preserve, for the most part, in the beginning at least, preserve what they have and go from there. And then you can start adding into it. And we did put in, you've got to be operating for a certain amount of years. You have to be accredited by an accreditation body, a recognized accreditation body for a certain amount of time. You're not just like some, fly-by-night school. And the other side to that, though, is if we didn't do anything, that what they were telling us was nearly every other state, even California, they just literally walk into some of these states and there is no requirement. There's no requirement whatsoever. So they're saying to us, why are you setting up so many barriers? And we have to weigh that out. And I know exactly what you're saying. Like, we don't want to just say that we have open doors for like any out-of-state college to come into New York. But when there's a scenario where they want to go in and work with the boards of trustees of a college and see if they do have synergies and they're able to work together with what they can preserve for that particular college, and we set it up so that you do have to show a long track record of financial responsibility, accreditation responsibility, operating at a high level in your particular state, that we did want to put those in. But if we're missing the boat on it, or if maybe we've gone too far, like, there's no doubt, like, we'll still consider like comments from, whether it's from the sector or from presidents of colleges or others, to say to us, you know what, like CICU, I will say, came to us. CICU came to us and they gave us a bunch of suggestions for what we should think about, for criteria for that. Whether it could be like an extended period of like a canvas that we need to build into the process, things like that. If we're missing the boat on it, like, and you feel like we need to kind of beef it up or change something, we're always open to to putting that in front of the Board of Regents.
I think that's part of the theme that you'll see, at least on that issue, was transparency.
Yep.
And because there is no canvas involved in it.
Yep.
Where is it? Because it's a merger in the way that it would get approved versus a change of control or ownership or other things. And I think institutions are interested to know if institutions are potentially at the brink of closure. This is another theme you'll see from almost everyone who said they would be willing to partner. Mm-hmm. They have been teach-out partners. How do you help the students? But a lot of times that information doesn't come until the very end. And then same with the idea of a highly qualified, or even with the applications being accepted to open a new institution. Mm-hmm. How do the current institutions know what's happening in the environment to help them plan and think forward too, when you don't always know if somebody's looking to open down the street from you, or there's an out-of-state institution that's looking to come in. Right. Do you know what I mean? And I think that was definitely a common theme I saw from a lot of the plans.
And we made sure to preserve, and I said this early on, I said, we can't set up a system where, as you guys know, we make you jump through a lot of hoops, even when it just comes to like opening up a branch campus or And so you'll notice these regulations and these changes, they do not allow for a college to come in here outside of the footprint of the college that exists already. So for example, if Northeastern wants to start rolling out like a bunch of engineering programs that are not currently at Marymount Manhattan, they got to go through the same thing you guys do. They got to go through a master plan amendment. They've got to go through a canvas. You see what I'm saying? So that part we tried to preserve, and strike the balance of saying, you know, how do we set it up, you know, so that you can actually maybe pull off a merger for an in-state or an out-of-state, knowing that, like, I have to say, like, USDE has a process that, you know, drags on for years, right? That's literally, like, Northeastern now is in a multi-year process with USDE before they can fully consummate what they want to do.
Yes.
I'd like to just maybe ask a little more specifically. With regard to a highly qualified institution. And I think, just to be blunt, would that include some of the publicly traded national multi-campus chains coming in? For example, in our sector, a Universal Technical Institute or Lincoln Technical Institute, just being able to come in and merge or buy a college in the state.
I think, and I'd have to dig into the regs, but I think the regs are mostly for like the independent college sector at this point, because there's separate regulations related to like mergers, as you know, for change of ownership, right? Because it's very different when you're talking about like a C of I, a certificate of incorporation, and a charter for an independent college. So there are kind of different considerations related to, you know, who can come in and who qualifies for, you know, having an independent college with a typical regional accreditation body, and a certain number of years under that, yeah.
There are essentially, just to remind
Yep.
everyone, there are two processes, right? So as a for-profit or proprietary institution, we have under 3.58 the degree granting authority, and there's a change of control and ownership, and that is clearly laid out in our regulations. What this is really talking about is two nonprofit institutions or two nonprofit entities
Yeah.
that would merge, and the way in which those mergers occur from a corporate structure are very different than the way that we operate, right? So they are a chartered institution, and the merger aspect is very different, and you had no way to be able to regulate, let's say, Northeastern as a Massachusetts entity if they wanted to come in and merge some way with a New York nonprofit.
Yeah, and then the other was like, how practical is it for like a Northeastern or somebody else to say, we were telling them, you can't use your own board of trustees and your own administrative structure at all. You have to create something completely different. And it's like, at times I'm like, think about a student and a family thinking about, am I attending Northeastern or am I not attending? Well, you're attending Northeastern New York, which we still have that in place, but the reality is like, does that make sense for like, you know, for Northeastern to maybe not be able to use like their administrative structure, and they've merged, as long as they've gone through the whole merger and they've created a charter, we do make them set up their independent board, but it can be members of the board that are at Northeastern. And so it's just not something that just, again, is fully impractical for a college and their students and their families to try to navigate what exactly am I attending at this point. You know what I mean? That's the balance we're trying to strike at this point. And like I said, most other states don't. They're just like, you want to set up a branch campus in California for your college, set up a branch campus. Like, and that's not, I don't know if we'll ever be there, but that's not how New York is. You know, New York is a bit more, you know, we do indeed want to make sure we've got like a lot of kind of rigor in the process if you want to establish yourself as a college in New York State, you know.
The other area that we saw that's maybe a suggestion is data sharing from either the licensed professions or from teaching and shortages, and how can some of the data and information that the department collects or the trends that you're seeing, how does that get communicated out to institutions so that it helps them think about planning, or, you know, do I want to go into teaching? Do I want to think about teaching assistants? There was a lot about human services and some of those, you know, maybe not traditional in our sector over time, but thinking forward, is there an area where the institution should be thinking about because of trends in data or shortages that you're seeing in other areas?
Yeah, we need to, I'm always very frank about this, is that we need to make a lot of improvements in our data, and we're kind of at the beginning stages of the, we are not a state that has a state longitudinal data system, amazingly enough. I think they tried, I don't know the whole history of it, but apparently they took a stab at an LSD, a state longitudinal data system going across P12, higher ed, into the workforce. And then it's a lot of the data privacy folks, kind of stomped that out. But now people realize like you can't operate and talk about all these different things we're trying to work on together, to have a connected P20 system without a state longitudinal data system. So we're starting to get inroads into that. And then we're also beefing up, as you mentioned, the side of the data when it comes to like different industries, especially the education industry and teaching, because a lot of what drives whether you should be enrolling students, say, how many should you be enrolling in like childhood ed, or students with disabilities, or in the technical fields, or science and math. How many do we need to produce? How many are we producing? Do we have an overabundance in some areas? So we're starting to build the systems together. We're trying to do like what we call like the data dashboards, which is a much more user-friendly way of, whether you're a college that's in a school of education or otherwise, you could go into it, log in, and you could see what are the dashboards telling us are in demand in like the western part of the state, which could be very different than what Yonkers needs for like bilingual educators. And what does it look like for when they're coming out of the certain schools of education in the different regions in New York State? And do we have mismatches and gaps there? And those are the things we really do need. Right now we have I have to say, it's just a very limited, if someone were to say to me, what's the teacher shortage in New York State officially, we literally just report Title II data to USDE, and the way that we spit that data out is we get a report every year that shows which teachers taught out of certification, right? And if you've got like a certain level that crosses a threshold, that we notice that like in the science professions or in the English as a second language professions or students with disabilities, that there were this many teachers teaching out of certification. That's literally where we've defined the shortage area, and we know it's a lot more complex than that, right? We know that like in the North Country, they're in dire need of physics teachers or advanced science teachers. They can't get them, right? In some cases, they literally cannot get a teacher to cover that subject area that is licensed, right? So that's what you're getting at, Jen, is where we need to make sure we're working with whoever we need to work with to say we need to build out a much better data infrastructure that's going to be useful for, our colleges and our school districts and whoever else needs that data.
And I can't speak on behalf of everyone, but when the state did try to create that P through 20 system, at that point we had raised our hand and had asked to partner, and I think we would still be very interested in that, especially, I hate to say the word, but gainful employment and other metrics that we have been historically. It would have been very helpful to have that data and that information. And if you think about the populations that many of our institutions have, with a high percentage of Black or Hispanic students, or students who are coming from some of our more challenged high schools, right? Like, what is the success of that student, and is there lessons that can be brought to the table based on the work that everyone's doing? I think that, I can't speak for everybody, but we had hoped back in the day to be part of that, and I think if there is an opportunity as the system is being built to look at that so we all have better data.
Yeah.
Would be something I think we would be very interested in.
Sounds great, yeah. I remember you guys had a great initiative with that. I think Monroe was a part of that as well, building that system out, and we just ran into a few ran into a few roadblocks. And sometimes it's honestly it's just the capacity on our end to dive into something. Because whenever we put out data, it has to be data that's done by like the set of rules established by the department, and if it's anything outside of that, we're not going to say it's not good, but we just can't endorse it at that point. Yeah.
So we have a few minutes left. I want to open it to the floor if anyone has questions or comments for Bill while we have him here with us. I can't believe, Christopher.
I did just want to just give an example of what you were both talking about on the ground, why that would be so helpful. I mean, I think you already realize, but Monroe has been partnering obviously very closely with the Yonkers public school system and other schools as well in the city, and more of those school districts are looking to do early initiatives of reaching students as early as middle school and as they transition into high school, and wanting to let them know what are the opportunities that are there in for example, in teaching, that there are top grant opportunities, what are the needs, so that they can emphasize those to encourage students at a younger age to think about the teaching profession, for example, because of those shortages, and to think about themselves. There's a shortage of black and brown teachers, but there's also a shortage of male teachers as well, and having those role models within the schools. So data for the school districts is always very helpful for them as they decide how they're going to program and try to incentivize students to go into those areas. So I just wanted to echo how useful that could be on the ground throughout the state. And then the more that we build in layers of incentives and support, then the more we're going to work to solve the issues. So the pipeline issues.
Yeah, we, many of you might know already, we actually created a couple of years ago, getting right to your point, Chris, that we created a teacher leader development office within, right now is kind of, under the umbrella of higher ed, we have our Office of Teaching Initiatives, that's the teacher certification side. We have what we call the APPR office. They dealt with teacher evaluation, the teacher evaluation system. And we tried to now tie, and then of course we've got our higher ed side in OQ that deals with registering all the schools of education and teacher preparation programs. And there's a lot of different connections that you need to make in order to make sure that you've got what they call the talent pipeline, which is under a lot of duress lately, because their estimates are you've got like a third of the teaching workforce is reaching retirement age. So that starts to work into, well, what are those areas? Is it science? Is it math? Is it school resource folks? Is it guidance counselors? What does it look like? So we created this teacher leader development office that, again, is a bit more of an umbrella office. And on its website, it's got a lot of the different things that we're trying to build into what you're talking about. We have a whole grow your own side of the house that talks about, how do we indeed set up grow your own programs if districts are interested in bringing like their teaching assistants or even their high school students who are interested in getting into a major to become a teacher and go back to their district or a district nearby. But we need to keep working on it and populating it and making it better. So that's what you're speaking to. And then the last part of that is some of this we've done with regulation and with just policy and guidance and partnerships. But the other side to that is there's also a lot of different, there's a ton of different dedicated grant programs that are out there, as many of you know. Teacher Opportunity Corps, Teachers of Tomorrow, the Master Teacher Program that SUNY oversees. It goes on, but the reality is like we need to have a place where people can kind of go and say, what is this program? Who's eligible? Who oversees it? Is it the district? Is it the college? Right? And again, we're trying to pull that all together underneath this teacher leader development office that is a much more holistic way of dealing with the teacher pipeline that deals with recruitment and retention and how you evaluate teachers and keep them and pull that all together in one place. So more to come on that, but we're trying our best to beef that up every year, and we depend on coming to meetings like this if indeed you are part of like a school of education, or if there's another profession that we're trying to do the same thing with. We need to hear from the field, like where is it that we're not connecting the dots here.
Well, thank you, Bill, for once again joining us today. And we know we have the work to do over the summer to bring the sector plan, but I think on behalf of the association, we really do value the partnership with you, your Office of Professions, And if you haven't figured out when we need something, Bill's usually picks up the call and has been helpful even on some of our federal issues as we have to try to figure out how to navigate, whether it's gainful employment and how the department can support our sector. And they've been very willing to do that, and that is much appreciated, Bill. So thank you for being here today.